Now, the pharmaceutical industry tells us they need us to pay the higher price because they need the money for research. But in fact, they spend more money on advertising and marketing than they do on research. Almost every other developed country uses its size to negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies. Why does the American taxpayer have to be the chump who pays full price? I say we negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies and bring down the cost of Medicare by as much as $24 billion a year, or $240 billion over the next 10 years. That could go straight to paying off the debt. There. I got you $240 billion cut to Medicare. Now can we please vote to raise the debt ceiling and avert a worldwide economic catastrophe? If my friends on the other side are really serious about getting our deficit under control, couldn't we start by getting rid of a measly $2 billion a year in taxpayer subsidies to oil companies? The companies that are getting record profits because of the price of oil. Unfortunately, according to my Republican colleagues, this would be a tax hike. These subsidies that have nothing to do with the price of oil, and they're making record profits. In order for us to agree to balance the budget, everyone has to sacrifice. Everyone has to pay. Who's in a better position to give, Exxon or a little girl in Minnesota named Evelyn? You see, Evelyn was born with cystic fibrosis. And when she was 10, her liver failed and her own toxins started to poison her. But Medicaid helped her get the care she needed. That's what this is about. Exxon or Evelyn. Frankly, it makes me kind of sad. So there are some more billions for you for deficit reduction. Get rid of the subsidies to the 5 biggest oil companies, $21 billion over 10 years. And you know what? If we are seriously going to address our debt crisis, we have to increase revenues. Now, under the Republican plan, the cuts to end Medicare as we know it and to slash Medicaid all go to pay for tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans. That's right. The Republican plan cuts taxes on the top marginal rate for millionaires and billionaires from 35% to 25%. Now, my Republican friends like to say that tax cuts always produce revenue increases. Besides the fact that this is simply not true, it also contradicts the other argument that Republicans use for not raising taxes. Raising taxes, Republicans often argue, would just give the government more money to spend. According to that oft-repeated Republican argument, cutting taxes will lower revenues and, quote, starve the beast. Here's President Ronald Reagan making this exact point in 1981, and I quote, "There were always those who told us that taxes couldn't be cut until spending was reduced. Well, you know, we can lecture our children about extravagance until we run out of voice and breath, or we can cure their extravagance by simply reducing their allowance," unquote. In other words, cutting taxes cuts revenues and forces the children, in our case, in this case the government, to cut spending. So at the heart of my friend's argument on why we must cut taxes are two completely contradictory, mutually exclusive arguments. On the one hand, according to my friends, lowering taxes always increases revenues and therefore brings down the deficit. On the other hand, they argue, lowering taxes decreases revenues. Which is it? Because you can't have it both ways. I'll try to provide some context for my friends. After President Reagan cut taxes in 1981, we immediately started amassing enormous deficits. They were so bad that President Reagan felt compelled to raise taxes in 1982 and then again in 1983. In fact, President Reagan, the supply-side icon, raised taxes 11 times. If President Reagan did that today, the Tea Party and, in fact, the entire Republican Party would run him out of town on a rail. But you see, President Reagan knew that to raise revenue, you either have to raise marginal rates or get rid of tax loopholes for the wealthy and for big corporations, which is what he did repeatedly. Even so, our national debt nearly tripled during the Reagan presidency. The national debt continued to grow rapidly during the George H.W. Bush administration. In fact, in 1993, he handed President Bill Clinton what at that point was the largest deficit in the history of our country. So what did President Clinton do? Well, in his 1993 deficit reduction package, he added 2 new marginal tax rates at the top end, 36% for those making over $180,000 and 39.6% for those making over $250,000. Every Republican voted against this package. They said that raising the top marginal rate would cause a recession. Former Speaker Newt Gingrich said, and I quote, "I believe this will lead to a recession next year. This is the Democrat, meaning Democratic machine's recession, and each one of them will be held personally accountable." Senator Phil Gramm of Texas said, "The Clinton plan is a one-way ticket to recession. This plan does not reduce the deficit, but it raises taxes and puts people out of work," unquote. Representative John Kasich, then ranking member of the House Budget Committee, said, quote, "This plan will not work. If it was to work, I would have to become a Democrat," unquote. Well, it worked. Not only did we have an unprecedented, uninterrupted expansion of our economy for 8 years, creating more than 22 million net new jobs, but we balanced the budget. And Bill Clinton handed George W. Bush a record surplus. I call that working. Now, President Clinton and especially the Democrats in Congress paid a political price for the 1993 deficit reduction package. The Democrats went down to defeat in 1994, losing the House of Representatives for the first time in 40 years. You could say that Democrats took a shellacking. Nevertheless, between 1993 and 2001, the nation created an unprecedented number of jobs benefiting every quartile of our economy, decreasing the numbers of Americans in poverty, increasing median income, and creating more millionaires than ever. To which my colleagues on the other side of the aisle might say, sure, it worked in practice, but does it work in theory?